Welcome to educator.com. This lesson is going to be about graphing in the coordinate plane. In this lesson, you will learn to graph in a coordinate plane. And there are several applications for this: charting locations on maps and GPS. There are several vocabulary words that you will need to learn in this lesson. Coordinate plane is a grid formed by the intersection of two number lines. The y-axis is a vertical number line. The x-axis is a horizontal number line. And the quadrants are created when the axes divide the plane into 4 quadrants. If you're having a hard time visualizing this, we will be labeling the parts later in a coordinate plane. The origin is where the axes intersect. An ordered pair, represented by an x value and a y value, gives the coordinates of a point's location. The x-coordinate is the position to the left or right of the y-axis. That's the x-coordinate, and it always comes first. The y-coordinate represents the position above or below the x-axis, and it always comes second. One way that you can remember how the ordered pair comes is that it's alphabetical order. X always comes before y. So let's label some of the vocabulary. I'm going to use red here so it stands out. You always want to draw arrows to represent number lines, because remember that the number lines go on for infinity. This is your y-axis. And then left to right here, the horizontal line, this is your x-axis. The quadrants move counterclockwise. You have quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. And they're generally represented by Roman numerals. Next, the origin is where the two axes cross, where the x and the y cross. And that is 0, 0. In the word origin, you can sort of see original. So I like to think of it as the original starting point. The x-coordinate would be this first one. It's the x-coordinate, and the y-coordinate is the second one. And remember that when you label your graph, you should always remember to write in the x and the y, because if you took your paper and turned it sideways, the x could become the y and the y could become the x. So you want to make sure that, as in looking at a map, you know the direction that the map should be held. So by labeling your x and your y, that gives you the location of top and bottom. Let's chart graphing points on a coordinate plane. A dog walker is drawing a map of his small town to mark locations he can walk to with the dogs. Graph and label the locations. All right. So I'm going to use red here to write the axes so that we can see it. It's a little bit crooked. It's helpful when you're doing this to use graph paper and a ruler. And x and y. Now, the client lives at 0, 0. The park is at 7, 3. So I'm going to divide these up into halves. So for example, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So as you can see, when you use a graph paper and you have extra squares, you don't have to draw in extra squares here. Okay, so I've divided this up into halves, so each square represents 2. So the park is over 7 and up 3. So this is your x, so you travel over on the x to the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I'm going to count up 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's 7, 3. That's going to be the park. This is the client. Okay. The school is -5, 6. You can think of the x-axis as your typical number line. To the left of 0, you have your negative values, and to the right, you have your positive values. So the school is -5, so I'm going to count to the left 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm going to count up 6, positive 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here is -5 and 6. And that is the school, the town school. Next, let's count the pet store. -2, so to the left 2, and down 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So here we are at -2, -8. And that is our pet store. And lastly, the pond is also a destination for the dog walker. So +4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is for -5. And that is our pond. Good, so we got all those points. Now let's name the quadrants of each ordered pair. So I'm going to name the quadrants by first plotting the points, and then we can see their location. So here's my y-axis, and here's my x-axis, and I'm going to divide up the grid. The reason why I need to divide up this grid is I see here that my numbers go up to 7 and 8, and it's only 5 across. So depending on the size of your paper, you may want to think about how you want to divide up your grid. Generally, if you use graph paper, that's good because the squares are small and you can use each square to represent one. Then you don't have to draw a lot of extra markings on your graph. So let's start off with A, 0, -2. 0, -2. And the good part about when the points are labeled with letters is you can just write the letter, keeping it a lot more simple. You know what, let's make these blue so they stand out a bit more. Okay, and then next is 5 over 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and up 3, 1, 2, 3. And that's going to be B. Next is C, left 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and down 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's our C. We have D at the origin, 0, 0. And then E is -4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and up 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's going to be E. Okay, so we've graphed our ordered pairs, and now we want to name the quadrants. Remember that this is quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. So now that we know the quadrants, we can say where each point lies. I put in a few trick points here because some of them do not lie in a quadrant. For example, A, it falls right on the y-axis. So in fact, we wouldn't say that it is in a quadrant, we'd say it is on the y-axis. And then for B, positive, positive. Quadrant 1 is positive, positive values. Positive to the right, positive up. That's going to be quadrant 1. C is negative. C is over here, and it's negative, negative. So not only is it negative to the left, it's negative down as well. So that is quadrant 3. D, 0, 0 is is not in a quadrant, and it's on both the x and y axis, and that's a very special, unique point, and we'll call it the origin. And lastly, E is negative and positive. So it's to the left and up, and that's quadrant 2. And the last quadrant, which we don't have a point in, but it's positive and negative. So after you see ordered pairs enough, you will probably begin to remember that positive, positive means that the coordinate pair falls in quadrant 1. A negative positive means it falls in 2. A negative negative means it falls in 3. And a positive negative means it falls in 4. And then there are the special cases where it may not fall in a quadrant, but in fact lies either on the x-axis or the y-axis, or is the origin and lies on both. Now we're going to draw and label the parts of a coordinate plane. So sometimes if you're just starting blank, you have to draw your own. So this would be your x, and this would be your y. It's sufficient just to have one arrow at each end. But make sure to remember to always label x and y so that you know which direction your coordinate plane is facing. And I'm going to label origin. This is quadrant 1, this is quadrant 2, this is quadrant 3, and this is quadrant 4. And remember, in quadrant 1, the coordinates are going to be a positive x and a positive y. In quadrant 2, the coordinates are going to be a negative x and a positive y. In quadrant 3, the x value is negative, as is the y value. And in quadrant 4, the x value is positive and the y value is negative. Graph the ordered pair, 3.5 and -5. So let's draw our x-axis and our y-axis. And I'm going to put in some lines here. If you're drawing your own, you want to try to make sure that the lines are pretty much equally apart. This is why once you start getting into coordinate work, it's very good to get some graph paper. So 3.5. So that means I'm going to go over 3 full spaces and then a half. So it comes somewhere in between here. There's 3.5. But also I need a -5. So I'm not going to put my point there. Just wanted to show you where it would be. 3.5, halfway in between the 3 and the 4. And then I'm going to come down 5. So 3.5 and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So about that would be my dotted line. So I went over 3.5 and I came down 5. And I'll label that 3.5 and -5. So if you see any halves, just remember it's just as if it were a typical number line. If you saw 3 1/4, it would just be closer to the 3. 3 3/4, it would be closer to the 4. Graph the ordered pair -5, 0. So I'm going to draw my x-axis, my y-axis, and put in some lines here. When you're drawing your own graph, you want to first project how large you need the graph to be. So I noticed that I had a -5 and a 0. So I knew that to the left I had to have at least 5 lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's -5, and it's 0. It's neither up or down. So that is -5, 0. It's a good idea to label your points. Sometimes you could label the point if there were an A here, you could just label it A. And in this case, since there was no letter, I'm just going to label it with the coordinates. Name the quadrant in which each ordered pair lies. Okay, so if you remember the signs for the quadrants, you could easily just name the quadrants without having to graph everything. So I'm going to say quadrant 1 was a positive, positive. Quadrant 2 is a negative, positive. Quadrant 3 is a negative, negative. And quadrant 4 is a positive, negative. So let's see if we can label these. Positive, positive A. It's a positive 3, positive 5. So this is going to be quadrant 1. 4, 0. Well, it would be over 4 and not up or down. So it's not in a quadrant. In fact, it falls on the x-axis. -5, -3. Well, it's going to be a negative and a negative, so that's quadrant 3. 0, 2. That would be 0 and up 2. And notice that also does not lie in a quadrant, but lies on the y-axis. We have a negative and a positive, and that's represented by quadrant 2. And then we have a positive and a negative, and that is quadrant 4. So by knowing the signs, the positive or negative that goes with each quadrant, you can save yourself time from having to graph all the ordered pairs. But if you don't feel sure about that yet, it's better to just graph the pair and then find the quadrant. Thank you for watching educator.com.